have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face and that impacts every single aspect of our daily lives. And if you want to join the conversation today, October 2nd, we are live once again. I was away last week and have much to say about that. But if you want to join the conversation live today, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296, and I'll be happy to take your call. Boy, so much to talk about. Such a wonderful experience that I had traveling these past couple of weeks throughout the Holy Land, and many interesting experiences to share with you. And, of course, many other events of the day in the past couple of weeks to talk about, especially as they bear on the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that so many free societies are facing, and that impacts so many areas of life in so many places where we enjoy freedom and realize the great interdependence of freedom and character. You know, this is the problem that most free societies are facing. When you give people who have a solid moral compass free rein, maximum freedom from regulation, from interference, from government, when you give basically decent, good people free rein, they do wonderful things. But in the absence of that, when you have folks who don't have that solid internal moral compass, things can go horribly wrong. And that always invites governments to step in. And there were so many lessons that became abundantly not clear, but rather reinforced on my trip that I just had to share them with you. One thing I'll think to mention early on has to do with the issue of safety, security, and guns. If anyone has traveled to Israel, you know that security is a huge concern in that country, has been since the founding of the country. Now, there are a lot of there's still a lot of political debate about the nature of the country and its birth. And truth be told, one of the things that sticks in the craw of some of the Arab countries and the, at the time, native population when the State of Israel was born was the full story, the full true story behind the refugee crisis. You know, the official line is that when there was resistance to the establishment of a Jewish state, that many so-called Palestinians simply fled of their own accord. They just up and left their homes and families, hit the road basically because they didn't want to live in a country dominated or at least politically governed by Jewish people and an Israeli government. So they just up and left and created the refugee crisis for themselves, and they truly believed that warring Arab armies would be victorious and then they would be able to return home. But that official line is not accurate. There were, unfortunately, several truly terror campaigns, one of which was by the Irgun, a terror group that formed, and actually one of the Israeli presidents was a member of this group, a leader of this group. And this is one of the things that really sticks in the craw of Palestinians, is that these groups basically terrorized people into leaving, invaded homes, basically confiscated them, terrorized people into abandoning their homes. And because the whole story, the whole truth behind the foundation of the state has never really been acknowledged, there are many on the other side of the issue who simply will not forget and want the truth to out. And they refer to those early days, the establishment of the state, as the catastrophe, because they regard the way the state was established as a catastrophe. And they also regard it as a catastrophe that the world generally doesn't know the whole story, doesn't know the full story, doesn't know the truth. So they have a legitimate beef. And then, of course, I heard plenty from the other side. But what really came home loud and clear to me on this trip was that both sides in this conflict have so much in common, it's frightening. So much of their mindsets are so similar that it's hard to see how there will ever be a just peace unless there's a massive conversion of hearts and minds. That's where it has to occur. And so I resolved after this trip that when I retire from active professional life, at the end of next year, toward the end of next year, I'm going to devote the rest of the time that I have toward building those bridges, toward converting those hearts and minds, doing what I can to be actively involved in whatever peace movements seem legitimate enough and right-minded enough to at least help get the job done. So I'm grateful for the experience. But what I was also going to say earlier on is that I became aware, as security conscious as the Israeli government is, for various reasons, that you will find soldiers and weapons very commonplace, but also almost easily missed because they're not intrusive. They're everywhere, but you barely notice. And one of the messages that came through loud and clear to me and reinforced a belief that I've always had and that I've written about has to do with the issue of weaponry in public hands. Now, in my travels, my wife and I were very close in proximity many times to people carrying significant weaponry. We're not talking about just handguns. We're talking about weaponry that could take out groups of people, automatic and semi-automatic weapons, and not just one or two. And we're not talking about just an armed military and an armed police force, but armed private citizens. And yet, despite the presence of these weapons, there was an overall sense of real security and safety. I was with a group of people. None of us ever felt nervous or threatened. As a matter of fact, there was a really was an interesting feeling of safety walking in strange towns, foreign lands, in areas getting lost many times in areas of towns, having no idea whether these were relatively good or bad areas, and never feeling unsafe. And never feeling unsafe even in the presence of the weapons. As a matter of fact, there was even a sense that if there were some renegade in the pack, someone predisposed to use that weaponry in a bad way against innocent targets, that person would have been taken out almost instantaneously by the good guys with weapons. And it was just I just can't describe it to you any other way. It was just an interesting feeling of safety in the midst of all this hardware. And it reinforced the message to me that regardless of where you stand in the political spectrum on the issue of guns and gun control, we have to recognize, and it's all, frankly, have no problem with some efforts for reasonable gun and weapon control. I have no problems with that. However, I am concerned about the fact that it is such a distraction from the real issue. Because as I said, the message got sent home very clearly that it's not about the hardware. It's about the confidence that the minds and the hearts behind the hardware, carrying the hardware, armed with the hardware, were of such a mind and a heart to do no harm and only protect against the possibility of harm, which led to a feeling of real safety and security. And it sent the message home, and it reinforced the belief that I've always had, and that is that the real problem behind the gun debate is that it's a distraction from the bigger and more important issue. And that has to do with the hearts and the minds of those who use these weapons and who have them for the purpose of doing harm, of doing evil. It distracts us from the character crisis that is the real problem. We're not going to be safe. We're not going to ensure our safety by simply making it harder for people to lay hands on weapons. That may be a part of the solution, but it's not ultimately the solution. And it's unfortunate, in my opinion, that it even has to be a part of the solution, because it really distracts from the bigger, more important issue. And that has to do with the mentality. The mentality and the spirit behind those who would do harm with weapons of any kind. You know, the Israelis have done a remarkable job controlling access to most forms of hardware. And for that reason, those folks of the mentality to do harm began stabbing. Stabbing became a problem because it's so hard to restrict or control people's access to weapons that could impale. We're not just talking about formal knives that people can buy, switchblades and the like, because you can fashion a knife from just about anything. Prisoners know this very well. So the fact is that somebody who has the intent to terrorize or do harm can do so. They may not be able to take out as many people in one fell swoop as they might be able to do if they had access to a weapon of a different type. But even then, there are these folks of a mind and a heart to lace themselves with explosives and blow themselves up in crowded places. And this accomplishes the goal of mass casualties. So the message was reinforced. It was reinforced. It reinforced a belief that I've had for some time, and that is that we are not going to solve the violence problem that we have in this country by merely controlling access to certain kinds of weaponry. It's not going to solve the problem, because the problem ultimately lies within the minds and the hearts of those who would procure and use them for untoward purposes. And the answer lies in addressing the social injustices that many times lie lies behind the formation of those negative hearts and minds. It's always a matter of character. It always comes down to that. There's no question about it. We can kid ourselves all we want to about it. We can fool ourselves. We can blind ourselves. But it's always been the issue. It probably always will be the issue. And it is such a distraction to focus our energy or our attention on anything else. And as I said moments ago, that message came through loud and clear to me and reinforced the belief that I've long held anyway. When I was in this foreign place, in uncharted territory many times, in unfamiliar territory, and was literally surrounded by all this hardware and never felt unsafe. As a matter of fact, felt much safer than I have felt in certain American cities, in certain places. There's a statement there, folks. Something we seriously need to contemplate. So I wanted to share that with you, among other things. But I have lots more to talk about with regard to the trip and some of the insights and some of the sentiments that accompany it. But if you want to join the conversation tonight, if you have an issue you want to discuss, a question you want to ask, a topic you think will interest the listening audience, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I'm glad to be live tonight on October 2nd. After a 2-week absence and the fact that you had to be treated last week to another pre-recorded program, I'm glad to be able to be here live and to be able to take questions or comments. So give us a call at 718-717-8296 if you have something you'd like to ask or just something you'd like to contribute to the program. Well, other interesting experiences to share. Spent a lot of time traveling to different archaeological sites and historical places of historical significance, but perhaps one of the more interesting and unfortunately disheartening and disconcerting experiences was the time spent in the old city, within the confines of the old city, where there is so much tension in Jerusalem. Tension that is palpable. Different groups with different claims. And this city of walls, not just of ancient stone walls. There's a message there too, a powerful metaphor. But it's a city of human walls, divisions between people, self-made, self-reinforced divisions, obstacles that people have put in their own way. And it's truly sad. It's truly sad. And it reinforced for me part of what will be the rest of my life's work as I officially retire from my professional career next year. I have two objectives in mind for the rest of my life. One is to be active in social justice and peacemaking. But the other is to get the message out there somehow, perhaps another book, perhaps a series of workshops, to get the message out there about the true final frontier facing us as the human race. The true final frontier facing humankind. It's not space. Those are the opening lines of Star Trek, space, the final frontier. After we've conquered all the planet, there's nothing left for us to conquer but foreign worlds. That's the message in that statement in the opening lines of the Star Trek series. But truly, the final frontier is not outer space. The final frontier is really us. And I'm thinking about that actually as the title for a book. We are the final frontier. And by that I mean, we have to come to terms with what we are really all about. Unfortunately, most of us live so much of our lives in a lack of self-awareness. And some of us live much of our lives in deliberate self-deceit. I'll repeat that. A lot of us live our lives truly in ignorance about ourselves, about our innermost yearnings, desires, problems, fears, insecurities, tendencies, good and bad. And some of us are not so much in ignorance about these things, but some of us, the more character impaired among us, live much of their lives in an awful lot of self-deception about these things. And so the real final frontier is coming to terms with ourselves and our nature. What was clear to me as I witnessed this penultimate example of political and social strife going on in this land that people call holy. What I realized more deeply than ever is that people have not come to terms with themselves. What they're really all about, what they really want, what their real innate tendencies are, and how to transcend or overcome or rise above some of those baser instincts that got us to where we are to some degree, but could easily put an end to us if we don't honestly reckon with them and rise above them. most especially, is this innate will to power and dominance that just kind of comes along with masculinity. It's not exclusive to males. It's not exclusive. As a matter of fact, for a lot of cultural reasons, in many cultures, for a lot of socio-cultural reasons, as well as some other reasons, this tendency is more pronounced today in women than it ever used to be. But this will to power and this will to dominate, this instinctual urge to have our way and also to have everyone else see things and do things our way, has got to be honestly reckoned with and risen above if we're going to make it. It's very clear to me. I'll give you a really good example of how ridiculous it can be. To keep the peace in the, quote, holy city, end quote, of Jerusalem, the holy sites there are not under any government body's control, truly, but rather Islamic authorities. It's to keep the peace. And when you traverse this supposedly holy territory that houses now on the grounds that the Jewish people regard as the Temple Mount, the place on Mount Moriah where they believe their ancient temple stood, their second temple, and where presently there resides the Al-Aqsa Mosque and also the monument or shrine, the Dome of the Rock. It is amazing what kind of banality you will witness under the self-deceptive guise of subservience to some higher order. It's just amazing. There are strict rules enforced governing what is considered to be respectful behavior in this quote-unquote holy place. One of the strict rules has to do with attire. Women especially cannot be dressed in a way that appears to overly emphasize the human figure. This is almost understandable. But I'll tell you where it gets a little absurd. And that is, there can be no public displays of affection, even among married couples. No hand-holding, for example. No touching whatsoever. So we encountered some individuals who were openly chastised and forcefully dealt with for such quote-unquote offenses as either holding hands One couple that had been married for 35 years uh, made the mistake of kissing. They thought they were kissing in territory that wasn't yet restricted, but in fact, they had apparently taken a couple of steps too far. And so they were dealt with by the authorities. And I was thinking to myself that here we are in this so-called holy place, and an expression of love between two committed people, perhaps one of the highest ideals that you could have, an expression of that commitment and that affection, is regarded somehow as an offense against the Creator. And I was thinking about the kind of mindset that could construe that. And that sent the message home to me that we will never bring down these walls that divide us. Never. Without the conversion of hearts and minds. It's not about power. We can't beat people into submission. It's always about character and the conversion of hearts and minds. That's ultimately where our safety will reside. That's ultimately where peace will lay in the future. And I'm going to be committing myself in my years of retirement to that very end. As long as I have breath left within me, that's going to be my focus and my dedication. Because I truly believe that if we're going to survive, that has to be the quest. It seems so absurd sometimes when I reflect back on some of the mindset that I witnessed. And it's been somewhat of a revolution in the field of psychology over the past few decades to come to terms with the intimate connection between people's ways of thinking, their attitudes, their core beliefs, and their behavior. We've come to realize this only in the past few decades, and a psychology based on that paradigm has replaced the old traditional psychology, and rightly so. We know that if the destructive behaviors that people engage in is ever going to change, and we're ever going to be safe and secure as a race, that hearts and minds have to change. The Greeks had a word for this. They called it metanoia. The word literally means a change of mind, but it goes deeper than that, to a real change not only in the way of thinking, but in sentiment too. So it's a change of heart as well. We're talking about a conversion of hearts and minds to a different kind of outlook. One that doesn't seek to dominate. One that doesn't seek to impose, and one that finds room for acceptance. And one that finds ultimate safety and ultimate security in advancing mutual concerns, in finding common ground, working toward justice. We're great wall builders. If anybody has been to the so-called Holy City, you know this. You can see how throughout history these walls have been built, these massive stone walls. One of the things that was very interesting is we got a first-class demonstration of what it took technology-wise, hundreds if not thousands of years ago, for these edifices to be built. Stones weighing a couple of tons, where there wasn't modern machinery to put them into place. How they had to be cut and how they were put into place. These were massive undertakings by human beings who didn't have the implements that we have now to help. And yet these massive fortresses were built. But history also shows that those walls we built also came tumbling down, one time after another. All the ways we thought we could make ourselves safe always proved to be vulnerable to opposing forces. It's in our nature. Nature planned it that way because there was a time in our evolution where it was absolutely necessary. But I'm convinced that that time in our evolution is past. We have a new task before us, and that is to elevate ourselves to a new level of existence. And that's going to change, and that's going to take a massive change in our mentality. It's going to take a massive change in our mentality. We need, and we will have, because if we're going to survive, it's a given that we will have to have it. We need a new myth that will unite us. And by a myth, I don't mean a falsehood. I mean a way of thinking, a perspective on life, unlike the divisive religions that we've crafted for ourselves. I stood on the shores of what has been called the Sea of Galilee. It's not a sea, it's a lake. It's a freshwater lake. And, boy, there's a story behind that, too. A big story behind the lake and the water resources for this desert area, and the kinds of issues that spark conflict and war, especially over those water resources. But I stood on the shores and I traversed the area where this itinerant rabbi that many in the Christian faith regard as the incarnated God that they worship. And I had this powerful feeling come over me. as I looked over this landscape. How just pondering the beautiful landscape and the wonder of this life and its fragility. I just had this intense realization of how the landscape itself must have influenced the human awareness of this person who tried to tell us what we're really all about and what we really need to do to save ourselves. It is such an easy cop-out. It is such an easy cop-out for so-called believers to just say the magic words that they regard this person as a savior, and then completely ignore every single message that he gave about how to treat one another and how to live. I did a lot of reflecting. Being in the very presence of that very landscape will do that to you. And there were a lot of things that I ended up saying to myself, I really get it now. I really get it at an even deeper level. I get some of the things he was trying to say. And for me, it was a faith-deepening experience. But it also told me very clearly that these ways that we've chosen to define ourselves with these practices and these walls that we've put up as a result are not what he had in mind. It's not what any of the great teachers have had in mind. And their so-called adherents who use these enlightened individuals as a pretext for all manner of inhumane behavior. It's a tragedy, both for those who are truly ignorant and don't realize what they're doing, and those who know full well what they're doing and lie about it. Those who just want to dominate, who just want to rule, who just want to have their way and have everybody else fall in line. We have a massive task before us. There is a huge need for a massive conversion of hearts and minds. This race is going to survive. Each one of us has to do our part, and it has to start with us. So I made an even firmer resolve to do my part, to be better myself, and to work with like-minded others to tear down these artificially constructed walls. We spent a good deal of time in the Galilee region, but before we did, we spent one evening on the shores of the Mediterranean. And interestingly enough, on the very first evening, just strolling along the beach, we happened upon a discussion group, an open discussion group. We got information about this group. This is just a sharing group. And it was a fantastic experience. My wife and I, we'd been strolling on the beach and we encountered this group and they invited us to participate. We met people from all across the globe. And within an instant, well, not an instant, but within a very short period of time, we were meeting one another heart to heart, face to face, sharing things, finding common ground, and having a lasting impression, something that will stay with us. I'll never forget the experience. I know that we can do better and that we can be a part of something better, and I know that it has to start at the individual level, and that means it has to start with me. And so I'm going to be rededicating myself to several things. But the two most important things will be in helping to develop the myth that will bring down those walls and unite as opposed to divide us. And bring peace instead of division. And secondly, to bring about more social justice. That's how we'll succeed in converting hearts and minds, and that's how ultimately we will be safe. And until we're all committed to that, none of us is safe. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. If you've got a comment or two you want to make about that, I'm happy to hear from you. Just give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I'll be happy to take your call. Well, one announcement that I do want to make is I had planned on this trip to finish the final edits to the book that I wanted to release before September the 21st, and that is The 10 Commandments of Character, How to Lead a Significant Life. And unfortunately, I have to report to you that I was not able to completely finish. And so I am not sure when this book is finally going to be available. So we'll have to keep up with that. I'll keep you informed. One thing I do want to acknowledge, however, is the 20th anniversary, the 21st actually, this past September 20th, was just 2 weeks ago that my first book, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, was first published. It was actually published independently, self-published as a spiral-bound book that I sold at workshops beginning in 1995. Then in 1996, after negotiations with several major New York publishing outfits, I decided to have it published through a smaller press, and that edition came out in September of 1996. It was updated several times. Then there was a 10-year anniversary edition, 2 more revisions, and then in the year 2001, the first Parkhurst Brothers edition was released. No, I'm sorry. That's not right. Not 2001, 2010. I'm still really tired, folks. I have to tell you, the trip back was a 13-hour straight flight because of some diversions that we had to make for various reasons, partly weather-related and partly airspace-related, because there was a lot of international traffic, dignitaries and whatnot, using the same airspace, and there are requirements about the distance you have to keep, et cetera, for security reasons. So between the 13 hours across the ocean and then not just across the ocean, but across the other sea, too, and then the time to get from New York to Atlanta and then from Atlanta back here to Little Rock, Arkansas, where I live, was a long time. And I'm pretty tired, gotta say. But 2010 was the first Parkhurst edition, so it'll be 6 years in just a week or so for that edition. So 20 years in major print for a still best-selling book. And then my book, Character Disturbance, doing almost as well and destined to be a similar bestseller. And my book, The Judas Syndrome, for those of you in the Christian faith, directed toward you. And then my book with Dr. Kathy Armistead, How Did We End Up Here? Your survival guide to the toxic people in your life. And my blog at manipulative-people.com. And the other blog that I write for, Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life at counselingresource.com. That's counseling resource with 2 L's in counseling. And my workshops for cross-country education, which you can find information on, both on the workshop and seminar page on my blog at manipulative-people.com, and also at the crosscountryeducation.com website. Next week, not this week, I'll be back live for another edition of Character Matters. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Dr. George Simon. See you again next week at the same time. Take care.